Hi, my name is Jenai, and I live in the greater Houston area in Texas. I have what's called chronic hyperimmunity syndrome, and I want to share with you some information about my condition in order to explain to everybody why Governor Greg Abbott's decision to eliminate all of his pandemic protocols and restrictions is going to undo all of the hard work that scientists, doctors, and nurses all across the world have been fighting for. I want to show you from the perspective of my personal experience exactly what you can expect to see if people do not adhere to the safety protocols that have been promoted by the World Health Organization, CDC, and other health organizations from countries all over the world. First, let me show you what I did this morning. Not even 24 hours after Governor Greg Abbott removed all of the restrictions that protected people like me from the COVID-19 disease, I got my second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. It was actually quite a shock because I learned something kind of neat about the injection. Did you know that the needles retract on their own? I thought that was pretty cool, and I'm glad the nurse showed me. But what I want to talk to you about today is very important. It's why, even though this should be a really exciting day for me, I still have a lot of fear. This isn't a fear just for myself, but for everyone, and I'm going to explain why to you now. All right, well, I'm home and in bed anticipating what normally happens after I get a vaccine, but I want to share a little bit of information and forgive me for not addressing the camera directly. I have a lot to say and I wanted to make sure I get a lot of the facts involved as well, so I will be reading this off of my computer while I kind of give this information and let y'all know what's up. So here we go. First of all, the biological responses of the immune system is triggered by a variety of factors, such as infectious diseases like COVID, pathogens, damaged cells, and toxic compounds. For me specifically, I have hyperimmune response resulting in inflammation of my soft tissues, including my nervous system and glandular tissues. For people with immune system disorders like myself, acute and/or chronic inflammation responses can occur in the heart, pancreas, liver, kidney, lung, brain, intestinal tract, and reproductive system. All of these occurrences potentially lead to tissue damage or disease, which is important to remember. I will be coming back to that later. For many autoimmune diseases are a natural result of rogue isotopes or antibodies. For this reason, regular blood work is needed to catch the early development of autoimmune diseases caused by hyperimmune systems like mine. Some young people who feel and seem like the picture of health may have hyperimmune system disorders without even knowing it. That was me when I was in my 20s. This is important regarding the current pandemic, but I'll come back to that later as well. So, I have hyperimmunity disorder, which means infectious and non-infectious agents and cell damage can activate inflammatory cells, which basically means I display all the markers and symptoms comparable to those of autoimmune diseases, but without a definitive diagnosis based on the fact that I don't have any of the isotope counts that point to any one particular autoimmune disease. And isotopes are another way of saying antibodies. In cases like mine, vaccines are necessary to prevent foreign contagions, though my natural immune response to vaccination results in self-attacking rogue autoantibodies. And if you don't know how vaccines work, they basically involve injecting a live but inactive or weakened form of the virus, are part of a virus or a man-made copy, and sometimes they'll introduce the germ after removing attributes of the virus that makes you sick. So what your immune system does in response to the vaccine is it makes the antibodies that recognize and protect against the virus. So basically, when you get a vaccine, your immune system creates antibodies. So my immune system already overproduces antibodies, but I still need vaccines so that it can produce more antibodies that actually can target infections. And again, I don't speak for everyone who has the same condition as me, and I don't speak for everyone who has an autoimmune disease. I'm giving you my personal experience and what doctors have explained to me. I'm sorry if it's a little convoluted. I'm trying my best to make it as simple and plain as possible. I have about 3 organs for sure that have sustained tissue damage from my own immune system. The most recent of which happened in January of 2020, where my entire right lobe of my thyroid died. It ballooned into a inflamed cyst and stopped working. So now all of my hormones produced by that thyroid gland is entirely produced by only my left thyroid lobe. So now let's talk about how all of this creates greater risks and challenges during the pandemic, not just for me, but for everyone. It's important to understand that SARS-CoV-2, more commonly referred to as the novel coronavirus, is what causes the disease COVID-19. And what COVID-19 does inside the body is it results in what's called a cytokine storm. A cytokine storm is when your immune system uses everything it has in its system to fight against a virus. Basically, it causes hyperimmunity, what I have. This means that in addition to targeting the virus, it's also targeting the cells of your body tissues, specifically in your lungs.
In a normal immune response, what happens is that the immune response kicks in and it starts to recruit cells from the blood, known as the white blood cells, to clear the virus. But in certain patients, what we're seeing is that the immune system actually goes into overdrive. Instead of simply getting rid of the virus, the immune system starts secreting cytokines, and this is known as the cytokine storm. And instead of helping the host cope with the infection, the cytokines actually can cause damage to the tissue, such as breaking down protective lining of the lung and the blood vessels.
This is why people who are overweight or obese, people with asthma and autoimmune diseases are at a higher risk of death, because they already have extreme inflammation reactions to viruses and environmental factors. I want you to think of it this way. A healthy person's inflammatory response at any given time is about here, if they have inflammation. Those of us with conditions like mine or autoimmune diseases, when we have controlled health, when we're not having flare-ups, we're still about here. So healthy person and then at risk. When we have flare-ups, we're about here. Okay? I am currently in the middle of a flare-up because I just was vaccinated. So as my body is creating antibodies, isotopes to fight COVID-19, I'm also creating rogue antibodies that are causing inflammation in my soft tissues, especially my muscles and in my ligaments. So when a healthy person gets COVID-19, their base level of inflammation response is going to start to raise. And the sad thing is, once that begins happening inside your body, it can cause damage that could lead to issues later in life. And I'll explain that in a moment. So I'm going to put this in layman's terms. People with elevated inflammation, when they're at their most controlled health, they would experience a cytokine storm in reaction to contracting COVID-19. That's going to shoot it through the roof. And that's why so many of at-risk people are far more likely to die if they contract COVID-19 than a healthy person. But healthy people need to be worried too, and I'm going to explain why. As I mentioned early on, there's actually an unknown number of people who have hyperactive immune systems, yet they haven't recognized or suffered from any of the symptoms related to this disorder. I mentioned I was one of those people earlier in my 20s. I didn't know that I had hyperimmune syndrome. I didn't know that contracting viruses as I was younger would cause my hyperimmunity to damage enough tissues that would put me in a situation now where my quality of life and my level of health is affected almost every single day. I no longer can walk without the use of mobility aids. I have reduced motor skills now. People would have called me a healthy adult. And when I was younger, I ended up getting a very serious norovirus infection. And ever since then, my health has been on the decline, and now every time I get sick, my health gets worse and worse. And after my most recent set of tests, I was told that I have to now go every year at the very least to have my ANAs tested because I have all the markers for autoimmune disease, and if I get sick again, it's only a matter of time before I am diagnosed with lupus or lupus-like autoimmune diseases. So that's where I'm at. Now, top scientists and researchers who are studying the COVID-19 disease, they've already been telling us that COVID-19 has significant morbidity and mortality. And they're telling us that it's urgent that they are afforded the time to understand the pathogenesis of multi-organ failure and lung damage resulting from catching COVID-19 in order to develop effective therapeutics for those of us at the highest risk for death. And they aren't able to do that right now because, especially here in Texas and now in Mississippi, where our governors have felt that the existence of a vaccine is enough to remove all health safety measures. Now, I've explained a lot about my personal health risks and challenges related to this pandemic, including how COVID-19 is able to be as deadly as we know it to be. But here's what you should know about the importance of continuing to wear a mask, social distance, and avoid places where pandemic-related restrictive mandates have been dropped. First of all, the CDC and WHO both agree that it takes weeks for the body to develop immunity post-vaccination. On top of that, scientists still do not know how well vaccines prevent vaccinated people from still spreading the virus. Even while vaccinated, there is a strong possibility that you can still carry the virus that causes COVID-19 and pass it to others. With you being vaccinated, any existence of the virus you carry would not be recognized as exposure. And once again, the spread of the disease can infect high-risk people like me, or people with autoimmune diseases, asthma, obesity, and other conditions that put them in the high-risk group. So even though I myself am fully vaccinated now as of this morning, my hyperimmunity makes contracting viruses still a dangerous threat. The vaccine may prevent death, but it won't stop my body from creating new rogue antigens that will attack more than the weakened virus. And this is true for thousands and thousands of people, because even though many of us have what's considered to be rare conditions, all of us put together make up a pretty big portion of the community, and there are so many people who don't even know that they have an underlying condition, and that's been seen. So while people like me are not the only ones at risk, it's still true that hyperimmunity syndromes, rheumatic diseases, asthma, cancers, including those who have survived cancers, continue to be at a high risk of death without herd immunity. And I'll explain how. What healthy people need to understand is that COVID-19 survivors have now been exposed to a disease which leaves scar tissues in the lungs and triggered their immune system to recognize deadly contagions and stimulate a shift in function. So you may be wondering what the significance of all of this information means for you. Well, put simply, it means healthy people are now significantly more likely to develop an immune disorder that can lead to diseases like asthma, cancer, or autoimmune diseases. What COVID-19 is doing is making healthy people who contract the virus more likely to become part of a large community of people who are struggling every day with compromised health and shortened life expectancies. So in order to preserve life of the at-risk and the lives of the healthy population who have yet to realize or understand the potential long-term consequences of contracting COVID-19, we must preserve all efforts to stop the spread even as more people become vaccinated. This is especially true when you acknowledge that there are 3 new mutated strains of the SARS-CoV-2 virus that are even more contagious. With all 4 strains identified right here in Houston, Texas alone, and the Texas governor's decision to retract all COVID-19 restrictions, including the mask mandate, it cannot be stressed enough that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has created the perfect conditions for a vaccine-resistant mutation strain of this novel coronavirus to develop right here in Texas. And Houston, Texas happens to be one of the largest port cities in the world. It is the largest port city in the United States, and it's one of the world's largest international hubs. For these reasons, it is absolutely necessary for everyone to not only continue to get vaccinated, but absolutely commit to wearing masks and adhering to the social distancing and group gathering protocols. Because until we have a better understanding of how COVID-19 vaccines work in the real world, and until we can confidently identify the efficacy of herd immunity, and observe several days or even weeks in between new COVID-19 cases being diagnosed within large communities, relaxing our vigilance during this pandemic is just not an option. So please do me the favor, for not just my own health, but for the health of thousands upon thousands of people like me, and for the health of millions of people who could become like me, because healthy people are not as safe as they believe themselves to be. Please share my story with others. Pass this on. If you're seeing it on social media, tag your friends and family. Encourage them to watch it the whole way through. I'm explaining all of this because I have a unique perspective on what's happening with COVID-19 and its effect on the body. I am not a scientist and I am not giving any form of medical advice because I am not a doctor. But what I am is uniquely qualified to speak from the perspective of someone who is at risk and has had so many tests done even during the pandemic, where doctors have had to explain to me what my personal risks are and what the risks are to the people I love who aren't in the same situation as me. So, if you want this pandemic to truly end, it is very vital that you take it more seriously now more than ever. So please believe me when I tell you, this is not going to end well if we give up too early, if we stop wearing our masks too early, if we allow businesses to operate at full capacity too early. I've given you all the information that I can with my limited knowledge on the subject. As someone who has a very high risk of mortality, I have information directly from my own personal doctors and specialists, including my rheumatologist, and they all agree that this is not over yet. Thank you for watching.